The term skinny fat refers to a person whose body mass index is technically within the normal range, but whose body fat percentage is significantly higher than their muscle mass. We're going to break down the two main types of skinny fat physiques, as well as the two most common ways people end up in this state. We'll also look at two real-life examples of women with different skinny fat profiles, and based on that, you'll get a clear idea of which type you might fall into. The training and nutrition recommendations for each will differ, and once you see these examples, it'll be much easier to apply the right approach for yourself. The first type is what we typically see in naturally slim individuals, the so-called ectomorphs. These are people who eat pretty much whatever they want, without gaining noticeable weight. Because of that, they may have never seen the need to go to the gym or build any real muscle. After all, they've always looked slim, and on the surface, that seems enough. But what's really happening under the surface? Due to a lack of protein and an unbalanced diet, their muscle mass gradually decreases. However, body fat stays, and we'll dive into why that happens later. A few examples would be models or other famous girls in fashion industry whose photos you have probably seen in Google with headlines like skinny fat. That's basically what it is. Now, the second type of skinny fat is usually someone, in our case, we'll focus on women of any natural body type who made a decision to lose weight. And how did she decide to do it? Well, she knows she needs to create a calorie deficit, but the way she does it is far from balanced. We're talking about these extreme diets, 1,000 to 1,200 calories a day, a couple of lettuce leaves, and that's pretty much it. Okay, we've got these two paths, and both of them end up in the same place, the skinny fat zone. There are three main reasons people end up here, and I'm going to list them in order of importance. The first reason is a lack of protein in the diet, which happens in both groups even though one eats whatever she wants and the other one is dieting. Both can lack enough protein if their diet isn't balanced. So let's take the first type, for example. This person might be eating pizza, cakes, fries, and on the surface, it looks like they're getting plenty of calories, right? But in reality, they're not getting enough quality sources of protein like meat, eggs, cottage cheese, dairy products, legumes, and so on. And for vegetarians, that would include things like soy. Also, the second factor is the lack of strength training, of course. And finally, the third one is the calorie deficit. I'm putting this third on purpose because we all know that the deficit can actually be balanced and healthy. You can be in a deficit while still getting enough protein, healthy fats, and even carbs. This is actually what those infamous Victoria's Secret pre-show diets are all about. 2 to 4 weeks of eating around 100-200 calories a day. But their bodies still look lean and tight, not skinny fat, more like slim and toned. Because yes, they do have a calorie deficit going on, but the key thing is that those first two factors are really taken care of. They make sure they get enough protein in their diet and they're consistent with strength training. That's why their bodies look firmer and more defined. Now let's go a little deeper into why that matters. When your diet is low in protein, your body starts breaking down its own muscle tissue to meet its needs. Muscle is protein. Just like when we eat meat, we're eating the muscles of other animals. So the average recommended amount of protein that's safe for pretty much everyone is around 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of your body weight. So if you're a woman weighing about 50 kilos, your daily protein target would be around 75 grams. In fact, consuming 75 to 80 grams is also quite acceptable. And moving on to strength training, working all major muscle groups is essential to show your body that you're actively using those muscles and that it needs to hold on to them. We've already discussed that muscles are a highly energy-consuming resource for the body. If they remain inactive or idle without purpose, the body tends to eliminate them easily, especially in women, which is interesting because if you compare a woman on a diet to a man, you'll notice the differences in their bodies. It turns out that the male body tries to preserve muscles as much as possible. Fat, however, is less important. For women, it's actually the opposite. The female body tries to store fat as much as possible because it's essential for reproductive health and protecting a potential pregnancy. That's why women tend to store fat mostly around the belly, lower abdomen, and hips, though of course there are exceptions. And it's much more difficult for a woman to get rid of that fat compared to men. Honestly, once you start diving deeper, not just into fitness and nutrition, but actual human physiology, you realize just how incredibly wise and intricate our body's processes are. You start to see how often we go against that natural wisdom in pursuit of some ideal, like getting that super shredded six-pack. But the truth is, our body is constantly trying to take care of us. It's literally doing everything it can to hold on to those little fat stores for protection, for health. And now there's one question I get asked a lot. A girl writes to me and says, okay, but what if I naturally have a more muscular body type? Like, let's say I'm more stocky or solid built by nature. Can I kind of intentionally do the opposite of what you're recommending? Like skip the protein, stay in a calorie deficit, avoid working out altogether, basically try to shrink my muscles and lean down that way. And so, could I end up turning into a thin girl without much fat or muscle, and from there I could decide what to build up again? Sort of like hitting a reset point. Now, on the surface, it sounds logical, right? But here's where the trap lies, and where the body doesn't quite work the way you might expect. So basically, when you're on a calorie deficit without any strength training, and also if you're not getting enough protein from your diet, here's what really happens. First and foremost, your body will actually start pulling protein, meaning breaking down muscle, from the areas you use the least in everyday life. And if you think about it carefully, which muscles do we barely use? Mainly, it's the chest muscles, because unless you're regularly doing pushing motions, like bench presses, you're not really activating them. And then there's your back, since in day-to-day life, we don't usually do pulling motions either. So what ends up happening in a calorie deficit without enough protein? You don't get that toned, lean look you were going for. Instead, your chest starts to sink in. Your upper back looks hollow, bones start sticking out, shoulder blades, spine, and your body ends up looking nothing like what you pictured when you started. Meanwhile, your legs, your calves and thighs might still look quite full and muscular. So this kind of weight loss ends up looking uneven and not like the aesthetic you probably had in mind. This was exactly my story. I'll share my personal skinny fat transformation at the end. So the way out of the skinny fat look is the same as the way in, but in reverse. So again, you need enough protein in your diet and consistent strength training that targets all major muscle groups with progressive overload. Let's break that down. We already mentioned Kate Moss and Alessandra Ambrosio, two very different body types that still fall under the skinny fat category. Now let's talk a little bit about training differences. The workouts themselves will be more or less the same. The only difference will be in nutrition. You'll want to stick to classic compound strength exercises that hit all major muscle groups. Think full body workouts with gradually increasing weight over time. Focus on large muscle groups first. There's no need to waste energy on isolated biceps or triceps work early on. Those muscles are already getting hit during your bigger lifts like overhead presses, chest presses, and rows. So, in general, when you're starting out with low muscle mass, you don't want to spread yourself too thin across a dozen exercises because your muscles don't yet have the glycogen stores to power through long sessions. As a result, you get tired fast, feel drained, and it becomes really easy to quit your workouts altogether. But if your training plan includes just 4 basic exercises, it's a lot more manageable and way easier to stay consistent. So for the first few months, 2, maybe even 3 or 4, it makes total sense to stick to full body workouts. That means in one session, you're hitting all the major muscle groups. For example, I'd do 1 exercise for my back, 1 for chest, 1 for legs or glutes, and 1 for shoulders. I'd skip biceps and triceps for now. So the question is, how exactly do we train? What rep and set range should we stick to? In general, you can stick to 3 sets of 12 to 15 reps. You want to pick a weight that makes your 12th rep feel really challenging, like you're pushing close to your limit. When it actually becomes easy for you to perform 15 reps, you increase the weight and go to 12 reps again. And here's the key part. That last rep in your set should feel tough. So a lot of girls ask me, can I just stick to my 2 to 3 kilo dumbbells and not increase the weight? Just do more reps instead. Well, technically speaking, you can take that approach later on, once you've already built up a solid base of muscle. However, right now we're talking about the skinny fat body type, where there's barely any muscle mass to begin with. And in order for a muscle to grow, it needs a constant stimulus, a clear signal to your body that says, hey, the load is increasing now, and so the muscle needs to adapt and grow in order to handle that load. Because if you just keep adding reps, eventually you'll drift into high rep endurance training, which sadly doesn't do much for actual muscle growth. You can train like that once you've already built muscle and just want to maintain or burn it out. But now your goal is to grow muscle. And for that, you need low to moderate reps with progressive overload. The training stays mostly the same for both skinny fat types, but the key difference is going to be in nutrition. If you're more like this Kate Moss example with a higher body fat percentage, then you'll definitely want to pair your workouts with a slight calorie deficit. But as we discussed earlier, in order for your muscles to actually grow, you need to be hitting your daily protein target. And on top of that, your overall intake of calories, proteins, fats, and carbs should be well balanced. That's a key point here that we should focus on. Now let's talk more about body types like Alessandra Ambrosio's. This is where a lot of girls go wrong. They look in the mirror, see loose or soft areas and think, I'm skinny but everything's jiggly. Guess I just need to lose more weight. In fact, some girls may have flabbiness in certain areas, not because of excess fat, but due to a lack of muscle. If you were to inflate glutes a bit, strengthen her back and shoulders, just add that lean muscle in the right places, you'd actually get a figure similar to Candice Swanepoel's. Her body is still lean, yes, but it looks tight, sculpted, and full-bodied. That's because her muscles are developed. She doesn't just weigh more on the scale, she has a higher muscle-to-fat ratio. If you have a similar skinny fat type, your main focus should be on building muscle. You need to combine strength training with either a maintenance level of calories or even a slight surplus. And I don't mean eating a croissant and calling it 500 calories. I mean a smart, intentional surplus. In fact, we also calculate carbs, fats, and protein. There is a common misconception among girls when they look at their bodies and reach out to me expressing their desire to lose weight and get a toned body. And they often forget the fact that a toned body always means having muscle. In reality, it's all about having more muscle and less fat. So first and foremost, you need to build those muscles. Only then, if necessary, can you focus on getting leaner by going into a smart, well-balanced calorie deficit, one that preserves your hard-earned muscle while helping to burn off any excess fat. In fact, that's exactly how I personally got out of the skinny fat phase. In the first photo, I had already been following a vegetarian diet for several months. And just to be clear, the issue wasn't the vegetarian diet itself. It was the lack of balance. I wasn't consuming any meat or animal products, but I also wasn't getting enough quality protein, even from plant-based sources. So basically, you can clearly see that I definitely wasn't getting enough protein here. And to make matters worse, I didn't really include much beans, soy, tofu, or nuts in my diet either. Honestly, I was just eating whatever, some veggies, soups, and stuff like that. It was kind of a mess, to be honest. And take a look. As you can see, all my muscle was completely burned off. As we've already discussed, that sunken chest, bony back, while the legs in general remained more or less okay. I wouldn't say they looked super skinny, just regular legs with no muscle at all. Then, at some point, I finally realized that things couldn't go on like this, and I got my hands on a pair of dumbbells, even ordered my first protein powder, and began increasing my protein intake while training consistently. And that's what happened in just 6 months. Take a look at my progress in these photos. Pretty much nowhere, right? Because there was no progress. And why is that? For these two reasons, I still didn't get enough protein to actually build muscle. I was eating just the normal amount. Actually, I was eating only 50 grams of protein a day, but I need around 80 grams for my 50-kilo weight. And another thing that scares most women is gradually increasing workout intensity. I didn't have that at all. I was working out for 6 months with just those tiny 2-kilo dumbbells. And by the way, this is a clear example for the girls who are wondering whether they need to increase their weights. Let's wrap it up. Increasing weights doesn't lead to some crazy muscle hypertrophy. You're simply allowing your body to rebuild what it's been missing all this time. You will develop muscles that are proportionate to your desired size. So once the weights started to feel comfortable, I switched to higher reps. And during that period, when I finally started training properly, I also ordered adjustable dumbbells and gradually worked my way up to moderate working weights, like 10, 15, 20, even 25 kilograms. Of course, my body started to change. I built up that muscle and it took me about 11 months. Realistically, you can count on a full year for noticeable muscle growth. Anyway, girls, that was a clear breakdown of the skinny fat body type. along with my personal experience. Well, let's sum up now. In order to get out of the skinny fat zone, we need enough protein in our diet, roughly 1.5 grams per kilogram of body weight on average. It all comes down to strength training with progressive overload, combined with a balanced calorie intake. So from here, it really depends on your goals. If you fall into the first category, you can pair your training with a slight calorie deficit. If you're more of the second type, naturally leaner, then you can stick to maintenance calories, or even go into a slight surplus to help build muscle. And later, you can decide whether or not you want to go through a cutting phase. All right, that's it for today on the skinny fat topic. Girls, I'm actually filming this video for the third time already. The first take was on Thursday, didn't like it, deleted it, filmed again on Friday, loved it, then accidentally deleted that one too. Honestly, I don't even want to comment on that. Write your questions and thoughts in the comments, especially if you've ever been in that same place and managed to turn it around. And bye-bye everyone. I'll see you really soon in the next video with a brand new topic.